My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
When you need mealtime inspiration, it's worth shopping Kroger for thousands of appetizing ingredients that inspire countless mouth-watering meals. And no matter what tasty choice you make, you'll enjoy our everyday low prices. Plus, extra ways to save, like digital coupons worth over $600 each week and up to $1 off per gallon at the pump with points. So you can get big flavors and big savings. Kroger, fresh for everyone. Fuel restrictions apply.
Welcome to the Writing Black Joy podcast, where we celebrate the joyful narratives of Black creatives, changing the world one story at a time. I am your host, Sophia Robinson. Here, you'll find conversations with some amazing Black writers and creatives, learn more about their projects and the joy they're bringing into the world, find inspiration for your own creative ventures, and dive deep into the topics that we think and write about. The guests on this podcast are writers of fiction, nonfiction, poetry, music, plays, and so much more, as well as creative guests whose work is all around writing joyful narratives on history's pages. So if you are a writer, a creative, or a lover of the arts, or you simply want to hear some good conversations, keep on listening and welcome to the show. Welcome back to Writing Black Joy. How on earth is it already mid-December? Time is so weird. One of the best things I've heard to describe how I'm feeling right now is the days are long, but the years are short. That is exactly how I felt about this year and about this season of Writing Black Joy, which we are wrapping up this week. If you have discovered this podcast for the first time this season, check out the back catalog of episodes and hit subscribe so you know when it's time for future sessions. And welcome. It's been a pleasure to have you. As for my longtime listeners, welcome back. I love you as always. And I'm so glad to bring you the podcast this season. To any of you who are not already on there, jump onto my mailing list over on Substack and you'll find the link in the show notes or over on www.writingblackjoy.com. And you'll also find my Christmas catalog over there if you have any last minute gifts to grab. It has been such a fun season and I'm excited to see what the future holds. And today I'm wrapping up with an episode I recorded some time ago with Erin Corine, a musician, a writer, and a coach. Here is a little bit more about Erin. Erin Corine Johnson, the Identity and Belonging Coach, is an award-winning multidisciplinary creative, DEI educator, member of Forbes Black, and founder of Ola Magnolia Identity Works, which was established in 2018. Since 2022, she has emerged as an influential thought leader among impact leaders, changemakers, and anti-racism activists on LinkedIn, while drawing from her diverse educational background from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, Berklee College of Music, and Inner Growth Circle Coaching School, which is where Erin and I met. She is based in Barcelona, Spain, where she continues to coach, speak, and build sustainable communities of impact-oriented individuals from all over the world. A flute-loving teenage version of myself who was dying every time she had to sit an exam would have loved this conversation. Erin and I talk about generations. Millennial, GenX, what are we? We start by talking a bit about our influences through the generational lens and a bit about our musical influences. We also talk about her foundation at the Black Church, discovering that she had perfect pitch, her journey as a musician, particularly with classical music, and finding her own style that felt true to her identity. And I also talked about an idea called the Edge Effect, which I heard about on the Hidden Brain podcast. I couldn't remember where I'd heard it during the conversation, but I absolutely wanted to give it credit. We talked about the value of music as a form of self-expression, creativity and my desire to be good without taking the time to be good, the importance of space in the creative process and also in making good pickles, and finding new sources for creative inspiration, and so much more. Hopefully, Erin and I will have a part 2 of this conversation in a future season. In the meantime, I hope that you enjoy our conversation as much as I did. Welcome back to Writing Black Joy, and today I have with me a good friend, another one. Yeah, I have the best people in my life, and Erin is no exception. Thanks for joining me, Erin.
Thank you for the invitation, Sophia.
Now, I would have mentioned this in the bio when I read beforehand, that you are many things, including a musician and a coach. So we're going to talk a little bit about those things, because I know you do a lot of, not all of your writing, and a fair amount of your writing, but on one topic. But then I know also you have your music and you have your songwriting. And you have your language. And so we have all kinds of things that you want to discuss. So let's get started. So first of all, tell us a bit about where things are with your music right now.
Yeah, I love that you started there. I feel like very few people, I've recently had the privilege of appearing on several podcasts, fulfilling that millennial dream of being on podcasts. Because it really is. It's a millennial dream. It's like you have to really compartmentalize it to generations, because that's definitely something that's become mainstream in our generation, right? And so
yeah, I'm not a millennial, but I do.
Well, I'm also at the intersection, right? So I'm considered a millennial more because I'm the oldest of my kind of like litter of grandchildren and siblings and stuff, cousins and siblings. But I am at the late 80s, right? So I'm definitely at the intersection of like where 80s meets Gen Y. So
well, I am I'm elsewhere.
Are you before that? See, I don't know your age. So you might be along with my partner. My partner was born in 1976. So you're probably between us.
I am
like 76, 87.
With your partner. I'm right there with him.
Oh, nice. I love that. So yeah, so we are a full generation apart, my partner and I. So he's like, I guess he would be so since we have a cultural difference here. So what generation do you consider yourself?
So they're different ways of referring to it. For all intents and purposes, I believe it's Gen X.
Okay. That's what that.
Then there's this thing called Zennials, which are on the cusp. So
right
to you, like I have an older and a younger sister, and the younger sister is early 80s. Mm-hmm. And so because the three of us fit together, and she is just on, even though I think she's more closer to the millennial side. She's an older soul because she has us, right?
I wouldn't consider her closer to the millennial side at all. Like I have an aunt who's a little younger than your sister, a little. So I have an aunt that's more my sister than my mom's sister. Many families have this, but in my family, so I have an aunt that's just 4.5 years older than me. She vehemently denies any association with the millennial generation. And I think that's so funny because I'm like, we are 4 years apart. Like,
yeah,
chill. But it's true because she is the youngest of siblings that are all boomers.
Exactly. And that does have an impact, right? So because me and my older sister are like 70s, and she's like early 80s, 83. But because she's the sort of the youngest of the sort of the trio, I feel like she's even Zennial. They call it Zennial. So that's, but I guess I'm technically Gen X, but
yes, exactly. So your sister is exactly with my aunt. My aunt's 1983, if I'm not mistaken. Is it 83 or 82? 83. Yes, because on the years we're 4 years apart, but we spend most of the time 5 years apart. So she just turned 40 earlier this year, and I will be 36.
Yeah, then
so she is, yes, like her siblings are all anywhere from 15 to 25 years older than her. Actually, she has some sisters on one side that are closer to her age, but not by much. She's the baby on both sides. And shout out to Lynn. I'm going to send this to her just because I shouted her out. I'm talking about her. Lynn, what's up, Lynn? We call each other Auntie Sis and Auntie like Auntie Sis and Niecey Sis because we literally are siblings. But so Lynn, yeah, we talked about this once, probably around when she had her son. She was 20. I was 15, 16 when she had her son. And I'll never forget that we were in my room cutting it up. And we were just talking. This was the first time it was very evident that we were in different phases of life, although we were only 4.5, 5 years apart. And one of the things we talked about that day was like, yeah, girl, we are not in the same generation. I'm just like, what are you talking about? We are 4 years apart. It's like, yeah, but no. And it took many years to really understand that. But it's true because like I said, I'm the oldest of my litter of siblings and cousins. Born in 87. She's the youngest by a lot on one side, born in 83. So, I mean,
it does have an influence because then also she would have had an older parent and,
exactly.
It kind of impacts the influences that you have. Like my sister and I have this joke that we always tell because the music, I'm like, I'll listen to the Beatles. I listen to like old music. My sister will be sitting along, my younger sister not, and I always say, wait, how you know that song? And she's like, roll her eyes. And then now my nephew is the same, and he's 9, right? And
it's the oldest and youngest. It's like those extremes, and so for the same reason, being the eldest of music loving parents on both sides, which we'll get circle back around to the music.
We will.
I'm getting better at following our tangents.
No, don't even.
I used to be so bad at following tangents. I'm so good at it now.
I'm very good at it. So I normally am very good at bringing people back. So if you get lost, be back.
This is called relishing in the gifts you're given. I was given a very neurodivergent, colorful brain, and now I can even follow it a little bit.
That's good. It's
good. It's a match.
I can follow. I can normally bring people back. My friends always upset me because we'll be talking and then the conversation goes off and then I'll go back to whatever and they're like, oh, and I'm like, yeah, no, I'm good at that.
This is it. That the whole sparkle of your podcast was born out of this special talent you have. So, it's only right that you have guests that can follow it along with you. You see?
Absolutely.
So yeah, being the eldest of music loving parents and grandparents and everybody, it was the same thing. Like I know so much music from so many eras of the United States culture, obviously, especially Black music from the United States and then beyond. So it's funny you mentioned specifically the Beatles because my mom was obsessed with the Beatles, and the era of the Beatles that I know the best is like the 50s, she had this double album of like all of the old hits. Like they're very, like they're from their first couple of albums. I mean, literally, I'll never forget like the first track on one of them. Cause it's like just plays in my head, like rent free. Love me do. I love you. Like that whole era, every word, every song, like literally. But then you go later, I'm not as good. But that first era, like the 50s and 60s, like totally.
Listen, I've listened to that album on repeat multiple times. My dad had a friend. They both passed away, both my dad and his friends, but his daughters were probably about 10 to 12 years older than me and probably about 7 to 10 years older than my older sister. But we grew up together, right? So, and one of them, she loved the Beatles. So we would just go to her house. She loved to knit, crochet, which I do as well. Knit, crochet, she would weave, she would do all things. And she loved to bake, which I do as well. And we would just sit there, cookies in the oven, listening to Beatles, knitting, reading. I mean,
oh man, the childhood nostalgia. This is the vibe. This is so the vibe. See, everybody had multi-generational blocks. Everybody grew up on multi-generational blocks. I love that level of universal Blackness. That makes me so happy.
Absolutely. So I know exactly what you mean, and I think it's so funny. Last night, I wish I could. Now, of course, it's gone from my head completely. But last night, this random Beatles song popped into my head just before I was about to call a friend who lives in Texas. I called her, and I was like, "There's a song in my head," and I sang it, and she was like, "Oh my god!" She was like, "My dad used to play that because." I used to sing in a choir and in a trio, and she did. Oh
yeah, I love that.
So she was like, "My dad used to warm us up with that," and I was just like, I love it. I love that even though that music was even before our time, like we all have like a real solid,
really solid relationship with it. Okay, now I have to ask, what song was it?
I'm going to tell you later because it's literally just as soon as I was about to say it, it went poof.
Okay. All right. Bring it back up whenever.
Back to that. In the meantime, you tell us a little bit about your music because I know you're instrumentalist, you're a songwriter. So yeah, let's talk a bit about that.
So that's it. That I actually gave you in that tangent we went on, that whole journey we just went on with that backstory. Like I gave you the foundation, which was being the firstborn, everybody's firstborn, everything pretty much, niece, granddaughter, daughter, everything, of a lot of music loving family members. And so that's kind of where it started for me. And recognizing that, I didn't just love music. There was somewhere, and it took me a long time to kind of locate that first indicator of musical inclination, or kind of just gravitating towards music in general as something more than just loving music. It was my grandmother, my mom's mother, who is literally my best friend in this whole entire world. Like, nobody can touch our relationship, and they've tried over the years, but I think people have accepted it at this point. We were just born on this earth to find each other. That's just what it is. That's me and my grandma. That's me and my mom's mom. And so she helped raise me. That's the backstory. So I was with her until I went to kindergarten, about 5 years old. And so, they all did this loving tag team with me when I was little. And so, my grandmother had this old piano in her house. And what I used to do was, and because my grandmother was and still is deeply entrenched in her church, right? She serves in the church. She, does accounting for the church. She, does a lot of organization work with the church. And it's the same church that she's gone to since, I think she said my mom was maybe a teenager. I think my mom is the one who started going to this church. And then my grandma started going to this church. And then my mom moved out of the city and kind of gravitated away from that church while my grandmother stayed there. So my grandmother's been a member of the same church, Calvary Missionary Baptist Church on the south side of Chicago and South Shore. I always forget if it's 82nd or 83rd, and I might be wrong on both of those. It's 82nd and Jeffrey in Chicago. And basically, my grandmother, because she's so entrenched in church culture, that's being entrenched in every aspect of what it means to lead a Black church, right? Including the music ministry, like what musicians' personalities are like, what they do, the operations of it all, like just kind of the order of ceremonies, kind of, my grandmother's just really observant and entrenched in that. She also sang in the choir when she was a girl, right? So when she used to go to church with my great grandmother. So it's definitely a multi-generational birthright type of thing. Everybody picks a church, goes to church, sings in the choir, does music or whatever. So my grandma played piano for a little bit. Growing up, she sang in the choir. That my mom played more piano, also sang in the choir of our home church that I just mentioned. And so my grandmother, I guess she noticed when I was really little that I used to, anytime I'd hear commercials or jingles or the opening songs to cartoons that I watched and stuff, I would play them on the piano. She noticed that I would just take it right off the TV and find it on the piano. And she was like, that's really interesting. So she didn't tell me till much later. I remember she used to say, yeah, my granddaughter plays by ear. Yeah, she plays by ear. And I didn't fully connect to what that meant, in those terms. But what she noticed is that I had perfect pitch from a very young age. Now, I didn't find that out until I didn't know what perfect pitch was, what that meant, or that to non-Black people that weren't in a church that was even like an anomaly. Because in my world, I thought everybody did that. I thought everybody could play by ear. I thought everybody knew what notes they were playing when they went to the piano. Like, this is just what I thought. And so fast forward to starting music, I do remember having a very instant gravitation towards my instrument. That's a whole story about how I chose the flute specifically and became subsequently obsessed with the flute. That's what I went to school for and blah, blah, blah. But before that, my senior year in high school, my high school music theory teacher, the same thing. I think he noticed on my homework that I was doing dictation exercises and I never got anything wrong. And he was like, that's really odd. Even my most talented music students, like one or two, they're going to get wrong at some point, but I did not, apparently. So he pulled me into his office and he said, Erin, I have a question. And he's like, I've been looking at your homework. And my first trauma response in my head was like, oh, he thinks I'm cheating with my, by looking at my best friend's homework. Like, oh man, this is about to be a whole thing and whatever. But it was, just that trauma response, that Black kid that's always in trouble for no good reason type of thing. Cause I wasn't a bad kid. It's just every other year my teachers hated me. And I really mean that. I was minding my own business, And so he was just like, yeah, I'm looking at your homework and I've noticed that you've never gotten a single one wrong on your dictation exercise. Do you have perfect pitch? And I was like, what's that? And he's like, do you have relative pitch? And I said, what is that? Literally, I had no idea what he was talking about. And he said, okay. He goes over to the piano and he's like, do the short little dictation. I'm like, okay. So I did it. And then he said, okay. He looked at it. He said, okay, one more short dictation. I was like, all right. And I did it. And he's like, did you notice I didn't give you the first note? And I said, no, I didn't think about it. And he's like, you have perfect pitch. And so suddenly everything my grandmother had always been talking about made a lot of sense. She was like, yeah, playing by ear, like that's what we call it. You know, that's how in our culture, we know somebody should be playing music. And I think it's such a beautiful, it was such a beautiful foreshadowing of the intersection of music, art, and decolonial work that I do, because there are Black people walking around this earth operating under such Eurocentric criteria around their music making, which cue the whole entire trauma that I had and subsequent like identity crisis that started to unfold when I was studying classical music in college. We're operating on such Eurocentric standards that we don't understand that so many of us are innately disposed to be incredible musicians, because primitively, culturally, a lot of the African cultures that we come from that were brought over to the United States, that were stolen and forced to assimilate into whatever colonizer's culture we were being pulled into against our will. We've lost a lot of that. And not only that, but it's being called something else. It's being co-opted. It's being kind of, the goalpost is being shifted on what it means to be a musician and what it doesn't mean. And so all of this is to say, my musicianship started way earlier than what I would consider I called myself a musician. And the subsequent identity crisis after studying classical music for 12 years, leaving it, but knowing that it's not that music isn't my ministry, it's that music is not my ministry. You know, I like to say that I didn't fall out of love with classical music. I fell out of identity with it. And that's something that I've only recently been able to articulate about my journey growing up as a musician, or somebody who was born with the gift of music, that was given an instrument to channel that with after age 12, but was then forced into a very Eurocentric style of music making, which is classical music, then doing an entire degree in classical music, taking a break, going back to do a master's, figuring out, it's not music, it's classical music. Something's wrong. Mm-hmm. Something is not aligning. And that kickstarting the journey that brought me to Spain, you know? So nowadays, I've been on this journey for the last, I would say 12 years, since I started realizing classical music was the thing that was starting to kind of trigger me and pull me away, and had also very much suppressed a lot of my natural gifts and instincts, right? Like obviously playing by ear, quote unquote, just to honor my grandmother with that, but having perfect pitch and a few other like foundational predispositions, because perfect pitch is a predisposition. It's not automatically something that makes you a better musician, but it's like, it doesn't like, and also there's people who are born with that predisposition and never use it.
Absolutely.
I've had lots of friends that had the predisposition for perfect pitch, but they never studied music or really wrapped themselves up in music. So they were never able to use it, but it is a predisposition, you know? So it's one of those things where, you know, classical music kind of made it go that direction, and it was really useful in certain contexts. But then I basically kind of tore down that entire structure in my own life. Mm-hmm. And had to rebuild using those original tools. And the journey to reconnecting to them has been really, really wild. And so now 10 years, now almost 11 years in a couple weeks, in 11 days, literally 11 years before I make 11 years in Spain, this entire journey has been, okay, how do I start from zero when I've built my entire life, identity, musicianship around this language that I don't even really want to speak? That's not even mine. And so what did I do? When I had my first gig with my name on it, exactly 10 years and 1 month ago, I started with what I knew best. I did a gig that was a mix of gospel, jazz, and a little bit of blues, and that's where my journey started. And so fast forward to now, it's been a lot of years of performing in different parts of Spain, on tour with different people, my own songwriting and things. Like I've done most of that on my own. Nobody's ever heard any songs that I've written yet, but I've helped a lot of people edit and co-write their own things as a vocal coach, and doing things like this as a music coach, as a studio coach. And to this day, where it's brought me is that, you know, I'm finally, at 22 weeks pregnant, deciding that was going to be my last gig with my name on it. And taking a long, indefinite sabbatical from performing. I knew I wasn't retiring, quote unquote, but I knew that I needed to take a step back, really process the 11 years prior. Well, at that point, it had been 10 years prior, 10 years prior, and just refocus my love for music into the fabric of my family, right? So kind of really reweave that fabric of my family, bring my daughter into this world, me being rested and not feeling like I have to dance and perform for anybody, literally or figuratively, in music, and just reconnect to why I do it and what purpose, what it serves in my life. So you are catching me right now as I'm starting to reemerge you know, as in I'm waking up some days and I feel like singing. And I don't mean like, oh, let me pass. I'm bored. I want to sing. No, I mean like there's a song on my heart. Like my voice is coming back, and my voice being like that embodiment of my message of who I am and why, you know, why I'm a musician in the first place. And it's funny I mentioned my voice because that's something 10 years ago I decided to do in addition to playing my instrument. Like I'm not that person who grew up, oh, I just dream of being a singer. No. That was not me. That was not me at all. In fact, I hid behind my flute. Once I had my flute, it was a perfect excuse for nobody to ask me to sing. No, I'm a flutist. I'm not a singer. You know, like just complete dissociation. And I realized 10 years ago when I did my first gig in Spain, in Valencia, Spain, that, wow, this is a huge part of my message. Not because, oh, wow, like all eyes are on me. And I keep saying that because we're conditioned to think that being on a stage means you are egocentric and you want all eyes on you. And I'm like, that's not really necessarily what all musicians.
I don't know a single musician who feels that way. Not a single.
Isn't that funny how
I've never made that association, and I grew up on stage and I've never felt that way. So like when you said that, I was like, I've never even heard.
Isn't that interesting? But here's the thing, being in a very Eurocentric and competitive form of music, like it has to be all about you or you don't get a job. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, like in being in classical music, orchestral music specifically, just the way the competition's set up and the way that you are.
I imagine but you have to remember, I grew up in Barbados. We have a different musical tradition. So
yeah,
associations are different. I find it interesting that you equate like playing by ear with perfect pitch, because I grew up playing by ear, but I've never like that. I think because a lot of the music I did was really informal. Like, yeah, I've never actually heard that association until today.
Yeah, that's interesting. Also, I think it's interesting. It's so funny, two coaches trying to have a conversation, because I'm like, it's interesting. You just said formal versus informal, because that for me is just like, ooh, that's interesting because
no, I say that because things have changed a lot. Even in Barbados now, there's a lot more. And when I say formal, I don't mean that. I don't actually think there's anything wrong with informal. Like I don't, right? But what it meant, because it wasn't formal, exactly, you talked about that Eurocentric thing. There were a lot of people that I went to school with who wanted to take the music further. And because they didn't have the formal qualifications, it was hard for them to apply to those universities and get a place, because they wanted to see like what grade are you at or whatever. And if you don't have it's hard to be able to prove that. Right.
Yep.
So that's the reason. And that's the only reason I made that distinction, because it's like with anything, a whole part of the formalization of it was that people that are younger than me now, there are a lot more music programs there that will actually train you to be able to have, because I understand, like, in the Caribbean has its own genres of music, right? So, we have a lot of calypso, soca, reggae. We have a whole other, genres of music. And there are a lot of people whose lives are bound up in those genres, right? Yeah. But also some people, like I went to school with a guy, and he was one that did go on and went to Berkeley, and, he was, I think it was good. He was a bit younger than me. And there was another guy who was a bit older than me, Sean, but he was very into classical music and played the organ and stuff at church. But bridging that gap, because Barbados, like I always tell people, Barbados, the population is 300,000. Like it sounds good in theory to say that you don't want to make it out there, but there's not always a lot of space.
Yeah. No, it's what you're saying basically just, it just goes to show you that one thing is speaking the language of music, right? Because for me, music is a language at the end of the day, right? In my personal and professional opinion, like music is a language of many dialects, right? And that's really what it comes down to. But when it comes to those, this formal versus informal, it's exactly what you're saying. It's like so many folks that are incredibly talented that like just move you and just completely like turn you inside out. Your soul is just like just completely just touched by what they do with their music. But if they don't speak the institutionalized language of music, they're not deemed worthy. Right. And it's like, this is why I don't regret studying classical music at 12, because it's like, you can't deny my proficiency or my place in European music or in anything even resembling classical music, because I put in the time. And I have the bank ledger to prove it. And I don't mean that money. I mean, like, as in the track record, like, of being in those competitions, of placing, of being a distinguished alumni from my university. Like, you can't tell me shit is what I'm trying to say. But having been through that and having moved away from that, and now feeling like even part of this renaissance for me means that also, like, part of this renaissance for me is also realizing, wow, I can probably beeps with some classical music at this point, because I know who I am without it. You know, there was a time where I didn't know who I was without it, because I had built my entire music structure around classical music. And so when classical music was gone, it was like the house was abandoned. It was like, wait. And I had to realize, no, I built the bricks of that house started at my grandmother's piano.
Yeah.
The bricks from that house came from my home church. The bricks from that house came from my music loving grandparents and parents and cousins and aunties and stuff. Like, the bricks from my house weren't classical music. The bricks were mine. So what I had to do was break down that structure and rebuild something else. And I realized that I never wanted to build it around something that didn't belong to me. It's what, like they say, like, you shouldn't be building on someone else's land. And, obviously the irony of that is hilarious, but that's what I mean. It's like, in my case, like, realizing that I needed to rebuild on the foundation of my own cultural heritage. That was a big turning point for me 10 years ago. And what brought me to even now, this renaissance the sabbatical didn't feel anxious. I didn't feel I should be doing this. I should be doing that. There was I had some moments, right? But I was able to come out of it quickly, because I realized I need this rest to be able to fully remember, first of all, who the fuck I am, but also, like, that music is just one of the many vehicles that help me get from point A to point B in my own life, and also help me to speak a language that reaches more people, right? So as I've been able to really lovingly affirm, the title of interdisciplinary artist, because I love to create multidisciplinary, because I do many things, as you said in the beginning of the conversation, but also interdisciplinary, as in my greatest joy is finding a way to combine multiple languages in a way that multiple languages, multiple art forms, and multiple mediums to communicate a point that reaches a more vast audience, vast in demographic, but vast also in distance,
Yeah, I'll tell you what, I'm going to drop the link I keep saying comments, but I'm going to drop it in the show notes. There's a podcast episode I listened to years ago, and it's actually it was one of my favorite ideas. And I think about it a lot also when I think about identity, which we'll probably talk about next. But, it was, as I said, I'm going to drop the link into the show notes, because I'm not going to, I want to credit it, but the name of the podcast is not coming to my mind right now, but I'll put the link in the show notes. But they talked about something called the edge effect. And it's more of a term that you would use if you were talking about landscapes, and you have like the desert, and like I saw this a lot when I was in New Zealand, you have like the desert, and then you have like a forest or something, and along the edge where those two things meet, you get an entirely new ecosystem, right? But the beginning of the podcast episode was about a musician who, and I feel like you would like it, because similarly, I can't remember where she grew up, but she grew up playing this instrument that like literally only was played in her sort of cultural, and her country. And then she did classical music, but when she was home, she played with her group and they would play that traditional music. And she said that, one day she got a call and she thought it was about her classical music, but they were like, they've been trying to find someone who played that specific instrument for years. And they talked about the type of music that they were able to create because they had those two influences. And
Wow. Yeah.
that allows you to create something new, right? The whole thing is creating something new quite often is something that comes from two different, like that. So that's when I talk about that edge effect. You have this one landscape meeting another landscape, and right on the edge is the creation of a new thing that's never existed before, because that's the first place where those two things have come together, right? And so I feel like sometimes it's also like you talking about how you could do some classical music again, but to me, it's also embracing the reality that like within you is this new thing because you're bringing these two things to the table. The guy that I told you who was he was a couple years below me at school who went to Berkeley, he developed like this whole new style of jazz, which is a fusion of like Caribbean music and like traditional jazz. And he did that because he came from those two places. And I think sometimes we feel like we want to be in one place or the other, when I'm like walk on the edge, like, like go on the edge and realize that that's where that whole new thing is created. And I think in music is the place where you really see that and you can really blend those things, because, I always remember I'm obsessed with music. I was a very amateur flute player. And it's funny, you talk about playing by ear, but I always felt like that was my biggest weakness because I could never read music. I've never learned to read music to this day. I've never learned to read music. So not more than like E, G, B, D, F, like that sort of it's never become instinctive for me unless I'm singing. I'm singing. I can look at the notes and I can see the values between the notes and I can sing that way, but don't ask me to play it because I don't know what the notes are.
Yeah, that's so interesting because I am exactly the opposite. And you probably noticed I got really emotional as you were explaining that edge image. And I just want to say thank you, first of all, because that was the external recognizance of exactly what my journey has meant over the last what's the year 2003? I would say it's been about 13 years since I graduated and ran there was a fire in my pants away from my university, because that's how just the trauma, the accumulated exhaustion, all of it, how all of it had been. And it's just getting to this point where you recognize how the society just forces you into boxes, and not for your own good most of the time. It's for you to be more productive and more palatable for someone else.
Yeah. So, you gotta take it back though. And it's hard. I'm not saying that take it back. It's easy.
No. I know you're not saying that, but it's just I think this might be the first time I've expressed to anybody outside of my home, that includes my parents, because I'm talking about my home, with my partner and my baby and my cat. You're the first person I think I've said this to, that, I could see myself existing in that, speaking the class. I feel like anytime I've tried to speak that language the way that I was forced to speak it before, it just doesn't work. It almost feels like, a code switch. I've been doing kind of this musical code switch for a long time, but completely just trying to completely unwrite, one of the codes, instead of taking that code and rewrite and recoding something better, exactly as you're saying, and that image was so vivid of the edge of the forest where the new ecosystem is born. And it's just been, because if I start full on crying, I'm not going to be able to express myself. So I'm just trying to breathe through it, because it's so overwhelming to be seen standing right in that space. Because I feel like people look for things outside of that forest. They look for things inside that forest, but we don't pay enough attention to the things that are sitting right on the edge. And it's interesting. It should be obvious, because that's literally my coaching area. Is I coach people. I say it all the time, on the edge of their own greatness. I say it all the time. Literally, you can find it. You could search on LinkedIn, probably find me having said that. And so that's exactly where my identity belonging framework meets people. It's right on the edge of the things that they're most afraid of being and doing, And so that was really affirming. So I just have to acknowledge you for saying that. So it's interesting that you say this about the playing, because on the flute, I can read things. I can read anything down. I'm trained to do that, Singing, I cannot read music. I cannot sight sing. I can't sight sing.
I could sight sing. I taught and again, these are all things I taught myself to do. I taught myself to sight sing, but I've never been able to read music. And I got really far without it, and nobody realized, because I would take the music home, right? And I would write out all the notes. Okay. Then I would play it like on the piano or on the flute, and then I would just memorize it.
Yeah.
So I would come and if I forgot it, because I'm an alto, so I always hear all the harmonies. So if I forgot it, I would just play something that fitted in, and nobody ever knew until I sat down in a music exam and they asked me to sight read. And so I'm out of my music exams with like distinction, and that sight read would always be a failure. And then I would make every single time. So after a while, I stopped doing exams because I was just like, I could have just learned to read music. I don't think I'm stupid. Like, I don't think I can't, but I just never.
Any language, if you're not ready, or that doesn't make sense for the landscape of your life or where you're going in music, then, it's a huge, but also a huge point of contention for me that, kids from, these beautifully colorful, native, indigenous, African, just black and brown, and then also like in some other remote parts of the world, like come from these beautifully rich musical traditions. But if it can't be translated into European music, they're not proficient enough. And it's just so disheartening. And again, these are things that, 15 years ago, I couldn't articulate when I was in the thick of it and doing everything I thought I was supposed to do to be accepted. Still sometimes having a gate put up until there were impartial judges in the room, and then they couldn't deny. You know what I'm saying? So it just gets to this point where, when musicians and not just kids, right, but musicians' value is being stripped from them over proficiency on paper, we have to really ask ourselves, what purpose does music serve them? Is it another intellectual stimulant that people get to like kind of flex and trot out on stage to get people to clap for them? Or is it still something that is used to take snapshots of the human condition, to express ourselves in ceremony? This now is kind of going into the foundations of my master's thesis at Berkeley, which was about this, like, what music does. I basically argued that music can be kind of reduced to three principal, like, pressure points or kind of bottleneck points. There's its origin, right? Its tradition. What purpose did it originally serve? Second, its classicization phase, when it's formalized, institutionalized, and most of the time stolen. And then a modernization phase, when it's kind of put on the chopping block in terms of its relevance to the current cultural landscape. It's put into kind of these pressure cookers because of, again, people examining it on the edge of what it was and where it's going, where it's coming from and where it's going. And also just new generations, new iterations of its traditional, or even rejections of its institutional, framework, or its institutional phase, or its institutional form, And so I talked about how, the key to more culturally competent, before I even knew this term, the key, now I can articulate it in the right terms, but it's the key to its most culturally competent iteration is to observe what happens to music at the intersection of all of these functions: traditional, classicization or institutionalization, and modernization or popularization. Like, what purpose does it serve? What does that say about society, or even the musician that created that art form or that fusion or that album or that iteration of whatever genre we're talking about, And so it's a really interesting way of thinking about each of these being useful. I'm not saying institutionalization or formalization of music is always useless. I do think it's really important as a tool for translation, right? If you're coming from classical music and the only way that you can access certain forms of music is to see it written down on paper, I understand that. The problem comes when you make that the new standard. That's colonization, period.
And I agree.
That's colonization, period.
I agree with that. But I think and I'm all, I can always tell people, like, my ideas are always a little bit different. So I'm always a bit wary of, like, I absolutely agree with it. And also I see the usefulness of the record, right? Because I think one of the things, and I know a lot of it has to do with, colonization and how the world has, and not just large scale colonization, European, but even within, like I was chatting with a friend of mine the other day, talking about within the African countries, there was colonization there too. There were different tribes that would go and, take over different tribes or whatever. And my concern is that things get lost that way. Always. When you have someone coming in and kind of like putting their will on someone else, something gets lost. And if you have traditions that are, oral, a lot of our, not just our, as being, well, everyone originates from Africa, but what I mean, as a Black community, but every culture started off with an oral tradition. That was pretty standard, right? And then some did certain things and some stuck with oral traditions. And I think sometimes that can be lost, right? And there are things that I almost sometimes wish there were more records of. So I get that too, but to me, it is just that idea that it has to be done a certain way. I disagree with that.
Absolutely. That's what I'm saying. I think that's the misstep of institutionalization. And that's also just the folly of human nature, is that we are extra by design. We will find other ways to continue to move the goalposts, to continue to exclude people from whatever, right? Because it's survival. The more the rules we write, the fewer people can be considered of a certain, can be considered of a certain set of criteria that deems them worthy or unworthy of survival or thrival, to make up that word, or prosperity of any sort, right? And so the more rules you write, the more people you exclude, and the more people you exclude, the more there is for you, period. Yeah. And there is no, this is not exclusive to art. It's not exclusive to any aspect of human society. It's pretty consistent across the West. And obviously it's starting to kind of infiltrate some parts of Asia, parts of Africa. We know this, right? And other parts of the world, because it's not specific to the West, but it's very permeating. It's something that the West has perpetuated, and something that many other societies throughout the world are adopting in arts and otherwise, And so at the end of the day, it's exactly what you said. I love that someone else understands exactly what I mean. And you having had this profound, experience in music as well throughout your life. What it's like to be invalidated because there are rules, or to be questioned because there are rules. Right. And eventually that's what they wanted. They wanted you to get tired of taking that test and stop trying. That's exactly what they wanted, And so the thing is, in my experience, that didn't happen. So yes, I every single time there was a higher gate every single time. There was a higher fence. And I truly believe I would have wasted many years of my life if I'd have just kept doing what I was supposed to do, even though I was always in the top 5% of performers, always. And I say 5 being generous. I still to this day might not still have an orchestra job. Maybe now I would, because now where diversity, equity, inclusion is in a lot of these orchestra, people have sounded the alarm in so many areas that it would be almost impossible to continue to deny someone at the level and trajectory that I was coming from. Obviously now I'd have to go back into the shed for 3 to 5 years to be at that level again. It wouldn't take me the whole 24 years I've been a flutist at this point, but it would take me at least 3 years, 5 to be really safe to get to that level. If I just wanted to go straight for the orchestra thing, I would have to be in the shed at least another 3 to 5 years. Absolutely. It tends to take, this is my professional opinion for all the musicians out there, who are like, how long does it take to get back to an instrument, the level you were when you quit or the level you were when you decided to go a different direction? It takes roughly the amount of time you were away. So at this point, to be fully back on the path, it'd probably take me about 13 years to be just if I were only focusing on classical flute. But the thing is, I haven't not been doing music in between. I've been doing other forms of music, and it goes back to this image that, that evoked such deep emotions in me of the edge, right? Is that I've been absorbing other things since then. I've been testing out other things. I've been reconnecting to other parts of me since then, musically, right? Not just outside of music.
That you will be able to take I'm not saying you will be able to, you're gonna do it, but you can.
I'm not playing.
I know you're not gonna do it. That's why I'm saying
at least not in that format. Not in this not like going back in time type, but like, yeah, I want an orchestra. I want to be principal of the whatever symphony. No. That's no. I don't want that.
That, you know, when I grew up, I wanted to play the flute, and I wanted to play the flute because I'd heard James Galway and I just fell in love with it. Right. And, but I'm the
Who didn't?
I'm the worst because, as I said to somebody, I didn't want to learn to play the flute. I wanted to play the flute. Those are two things. A long time to understand.
That was a freaking gem.
Listen, those are two different things.
Said it with that.
But it's the reality. And I think that's true for so many of us, not just in music, but in a lot of the creative spheres, right? Where we have these people that, I want to say we idolize, in the sense that we have, we think we want to achieve this thing, right? And we go through this long period of time where our taste is so much better than our talent that, like, it's hard. It's hard. And what we want, we don't want to learn it. We want to be there now. That's what we want. Right. And I'm the first to admit that was me with the flute. I think because with other things, because I was very intuitive, like, you know, I sat down one day in church and I was like playing the organ, and my pastor's wife was like, "Oh, you play the organ for the church?" She was like, "Do you know how to play the organ?" I was like, "No." And she was like, "But you were just playing it." And I was like, "No,
I was just playing it."
I'd never played it before. I'd stopped playing the piano when I was younger because I got tired of John Thompson's modern
Whatever,
1 to 8. Anybody who grew up in the 70s and 80s playing the piano, you know what I'm talking about. And I got tired of that. But you know, I'd come to church on a Sunday and I would listen to the song and then I could play it. That was it. Right. So I'd hear a song, I could play it always. So that was fine. I played the organ in church, but I just wanted to be good, and I wanted to be good now. And that was probably my downfall, especially with the flute.
Yeah.
But I love that over the years, especially now, there are a lot more people playing the flute differently. It's not just classical, as much as I love, and you know,
yeah. It's an appropriate conversation. The National Flute Association in the United States, the convention just ended this past weekend. One of my cousins, actually, shout out to Marquita. One of my cousins, she's really the wife of a cousin, the wife of an uncle of my cousin. So cousin. Whatever. Yeah, cousin. You know, cousin. Hey, Marquita. So, Marquita used to play the flute, and she just started playing again. And she went to the convention, and I told her, I was like, "Girl, I'm so sad I didn't know you were going," because I used to go every year, clearly, because I was a performance student, as a classical performance student. So I used to go every year. My teacher, shout out to Dr. Jonathan Keeble, my flute dad. He's awesome. He's amazing. He won a Distinguished Service Award with the NFA this year. One of my former classmates, is right now the president of NFA. So it's like, I still have a lot of feelers in the flute world and whatever, but then I'm realizing, but I'm still part of the flute world. I just haven't been to the convention since 2016. I did a workshop at the San Diego convention, and it was called The Flute That Sings. And that was my first attempt at like just trying to synthesize these two parts of me, of trying to, you know, really exist on the edge, you know, of these two things. And this was just within music, not even talking about genres or anything like that. It's, you know, again, identity is such a funny thing. And I know we said we were going to come back around to that. It looks like we might need like a part 2 for that. But anyway,
part 2.
Seriously, we might need a part 2. I'm down. I'm totally down.
I'm totally down with that.
Yes. And so, you know, the way this has all come back around, and it's just interesting. I worked at the convention 2014, the Chicago convention, as the kind of artist representative from my flute company, Nagahara Flutes, based in Boston. And it was just so this was probably the first year in a long time that I actually didn't have immense FOMO at just not being someplace where I felt I was supposed to be, because I was like, no, it's not time yet, but I'll be back. And also realizing that I've really needed this space. I really needed this sabbatical. I really needed this time to just redetermine my relationship. Something I also realized when I was talking to a student and a student that I was coaching in my last kind of contract job with a school, coaching kind of a big batch of their students. one of the things, and this professional development student who was having a similar crisis around, but I want to do more music, but should I do music business? But every time I sit down to sing or to write, I don't feel as connected as I used to, and whatever. And basically we arrived to the conclusion that it used to be kind of a haven for her. It was a safe space from some external pressure points and some unfolding trauma that she was dealing with as a kid. And as I was coaching her to this conclusion, I got off the phone and I was like, oh my God, I think that's part of my problem too. Like, this used to be an escape from something that I'm not afraid of anymore.
Yeah. And I want to, this is the last thing you're going to be able to talk about, because I know we've all got other commitments out there. But I think these are two really important things I want to bring back around. We can stick it to music because that's what we've been talking about, but I think it applies,
Part 2, we'll go to the other stuff. Well, Part 2, let's do it.
I'm more of a writer than a musician, although I've been a musician far longer than I've read. Sorry, this is an aside, but when both my oldest nephew and my niece were born, I realized that they both could sing before they could talk, right? And it just made me think about how long and by we, I mean me and both my sisters, because I mean, my older sister played the violin. Both me and my younger sister sing. We still sing. She's into the piano. I was flute, piano, and anything I could get my hands on. I've got a saxophone in the corner. We'll talk about that another day. But, and just this idea that, like, I probably was music my whole life, even though, I didn't start writing until later, but writing has my heart. But important in terms of creativity, two things. One, and it's this idea of space. Like, it took me a long time to understand, and I wrote about it ages ago in terms of writing, but I think the same is true for writing music and for creating music, playing music, that not writing is a part of the writing process. Like, space is actually a part of the creative process.
Amen.
I don't.
Amen.
Listen.
Amen. 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 Yes, girl.
I don't know if there's going to be a lag and it's going to sound dreadful, but I had to.
Right? Oh my God.
But I think because of how productivity looks, quote unquote, I'm doing the whole air quotes thing, people forget the importance of space, the importance of staring into space and going for the walk and not doing the thing. And it could be for weeks and it could be for months and it could even be for a couple of years, but sometimes something is brewing. You need that space in order, I come from the Caribbean. We make rum, right? When you put down rum and then you take it back up how many ever years later, it's a different drink. And I think creativity is like that. You need time. Same for wine. Same for music. The same for ideas.
Same for good pickles.
Good pickles,
Good pickles. Oh my goodness.
Need time, music, creativity, like just the importance of space. Like, I think sometimes we feel like we're only being productive when we're doing the thing, and we forget that not doing the thing is a part of doing the thing.
Well, this is a really good kind of teaser for part 2, which is, in my coaching, I talk a lot about this, that for every action in your life, there must be a reaction. And if your reaction to productivity is to beat yourself up about not producing more, then you're actually kind of creating this, like, really this literal death spiral of just keeping going. Like, you're not breaking the momentum. You're not counterbalancing that momentum. And so that's the first thing. So for every action, there must be a reaction, meaning, productivity is literally to produce something, right? Like, there's an end game, there's something that needs to come out of that. Right. And I think there's a few things that happen when we, trauma bond to the word productivity, is that we think that that a physical or a tangible result has to be tangible. That's one mistake. Also, we think that productivity is only about that item that other people can then benefit from. Because you can also produce good feelings. You can also produce an aha moment that then helps you be even more focused or feel even more fulfilled the next day when you pick it up again. There's a lot of things. And so on one hand, I like to tell people on the being side of things, right? And we know this, from being coaches that, the being side of things is very much about who you are, how you show up in the world. Like, what's the essence of you that people can feel the moment that they walk into a room with you, that they interact with something that you've created, when they leave a conversation with you. Like, what is the essence of you? So productivity in a being sense and a being based sense has to be very much about how do you rest, recharge, and reconnect with all those things that you are. And that tends to mean you need to put the pencil down, put the instrument down, and simmer on all of those things that make you who you are. Like the thing is that any good dish only tastes better after rest. You know what I'm saying? You can't be cooking all the time. The other side of things would be on the doing based side of things. Well, for me, we have to understand productivity is one thing, but activity is another. And that's still a very, very valid way of moving through the world, doing the things that you are connected to, your life's work. So being active may not necessarily produce something, right?
But also
it's still important. And on the vice versa, being productive might not mean being active, because you might be sleeping and making some money off some shit you made yesterday.
But also,
okay,
I feel like creativity needs space. And I think we forget that even that space is a part of the productivity cycle.
Of course.
Forget because if somebody, I always say to myself, because I teach at university now, and I always say, if somebody were to come in there and see me staring off into space, they'd be like, what are we paying this check for? But the reality of it is that, if I have a workshop to write, I'm going to spend a good couple hours staring off into space. I need to just think this through. I need to think, okay, what am I trying to achieve? And none of those things are things that I do staring at the computer typing. Like sometimes I need to walk away. I need to go and sit out. Have a cup of coffee and read a book, listen to something, get inspired by something else, be like, oh my gosh, I know what it is now. But it doesn't look quote unquote like productivity. The other thing I wanted to
wait before you move on, I got to give you this quote that I came up with the other day, and I know this is not the quote question from before, because that's a different one. But this one is just like it's just so appropriate. This is so appropriate. Mm-hmm. You don't have to burn out for the fire to have mattered. Rest first, hustle later. And this was part of a thought that came from you can manifest at rest, is what I was saying. Because it was me trying to like really wrap my head around being so far away from wrapping my head around not creating as much for a couple of weeks, well, up to a month or whatever. And just saying that, first of all, you can manifest at rest. Secondly, you don't have to burn out for the fire to have existed or to have mattered. Rest first, hustle later, right? And in this culture, we're just so, in this collective culture, right? Because it's multiple cultures. In this collective culture, we're so asked about like the principal evidence that you've worked hard, being that you
what are your KPIs?
like
that.
Like what?
Now the other thing I quickly wanted to, we have to have a part two, so I'm gonna let you go in a minute, but I just want to touch on this, and I want your last thought on this before we wrap up, which is you talked earlier about a student that you were working with, and the idea of, people using creativity or people's creativity being an escape hatch from something, right? And I think for so many of us, creativity has so many different purposes in life. For some of us, it is an escape. For some of us, it is a place, it is like for me, when I was more clinical, that was an outlet for me, right? It was an outlet for me, something to enjoy. It was a way to have, just to have something in my life I enjoyed. That was kind of just for me. Like right now, I was thinking to my sister yesterday, like I write this newsletter right now, and it goes to my sister as well now, but prior to that, it was going to one person. And I actually wrote a piece about an audience of one, because I think that, like, if you'd have said to me a couple of years ago, like, write this thing and it's only going to have one reader, I would have been like, what's that? But just how impactful it has been like just to have this creative practice that's pretty much just for me and just have this one person who's there witnessing it. Like that has been really amazing to me. But just this idea around, you know, going back to the productivity thing and this, you know, people feeling like, okay, now when you get to the stage when you want to quote unquote monetize it or whatever the case may be, but actually I think sometimes it loses the power it had as an outlet and as that escape hatch. I don't know what my question is, but I'm sure you can answer it nonetheless.
You know. Yeah, this is a really interesting thing. And I get this a lot from, I used to get this when I was strictly music coaching, strictly vocal coaching and teaching music. And I've gotten it since. I've gotten it in creative coaching. I've gotten it in life coaching. I've gotten it in all sorts of coaching that I do. And around identity and belonging, it's like, where is the line between this as a passion and this as a product? And that is essentially this kind of conundrum where, you know, it's like you said, right? You know, as you were alluding to the student that I referred to, and then that subsequently awoke a series of questions in me. And it was, you know, it's very difficult if you build your creative practice in a tumultuous place. It's very difficult to find a new energy sources when that turmoil dissipates.
Yes.
You know, and I didn't necessarily mean to make that rhyme or sound poetic, but you know, professional creative, I guess.
All poets.
And so what I mean by that is that it's not impossible, but it is true. When you unplug when you unplug something from a source, it stops working, you know? So it's not about keeping yourself in a tumultuous place in order to be able to create. It's about finding sources that move you in ways that still
I was about to say
with your life's work. And so the problem with, if you're motivated by money, making your creative practice, if you're motivated by money, making your creative practice, a product might be incredible. Like that's the source. Great. Your love for money and sorting money and playing with money and building wealth and doing things. It doesn't have to be a dirty thing, but I mean, as in, if you just want money for whatever reason you want it, to build wealth, to pour into other people, or because you just freaking want to take yourself on vacation and lay out on a yacht in Greece, like that's fine. That's okay. But if you're motivated by money and you're able to source creative inspiration from that, then you still have a source, right? Mm-hmm. But if your source was a generator that only works in a storm and the storm in your life is gone, then you're going to have that temporary void of like, wait a second, like I'm not sourcing my creativity from this storm in my life anymore. Yeah. And I'm having trouble creating as a result. Crap. What do I do? Well,
and I think people create more drama.
No. Oh yeah. No. We know this. We as professional creatives know that the way that people remedy that panic of not being able to create without the storm is they just fucking create bullshit everywhere. Literally, they just create drama wherever they go. They continue to they start to that. For example, like a good example is people that write about love and heartbreak and these things. Well, what happens when you don't have a source, when you're in a stable relationship or you don't have a source of that love, or of that like new love feeling, and it starts to dissipate? Well, what happens? You break up with the person you're with, write about heartbreak, and then move on to the next person. And so, yes, there is unfortunately a narcissistic trigger that afflicts many creatives around their art, is that if they have to protect that turmoil in order to continue to create. And a lot of folks that heal from trauma that used to fuel their art, recognize that this happens to them as well, right? Was the conversation with my student. And what I noticed, in what I would like to consider a healthy iteration of this practice is that, and I told my partner, I said, I was really afraid that being in a stable relationship, and not just stable as in I've been in a lot of unstable relationships, as in being in a forever relationship, I was afraid that as that love begins to take another form, that kind of like sense of urgency and omnipresence of that, in love feeling went away, that my passion for expressing certain themes in my music, not just about love, because I don't only talk about love, I talk about identity a lot. I was afraid that it would disappear. And then my daughter was born. And then my baby crossed into this side of the universe. And I will tell you that the most beautiful melodies I've ever written are for her. Two of the most beautiful melodies I've ever written in my life, and you all will hear it eventually, were written for my baby. And at the joy of meeting her on this side, because she's been with me for a long time, she's been with me since before she had a father, and so that that affirming moment of realizing that those melodies couldn't exist until I knew that I had a new source, and that was in the middle of my sabbatical from performing for people, from performing for money. But besides the one project that I was doing that actually she was born hours after that, but that's a totally different thing. That was also a source. That was a type of source.
I think for me that just understanding that there are other sources. There can be other sources.
There are other sources. It doesn't have to just be turmoil or even peace. Some people really can only create in a vacuum of peace.
Right? It doesn't have to be romantic love, or it doesn't have to be partnership love.
It doesn't have to be love at all. Another underrated source that a lot of folks, especially people that are hyper focused and tend to be, I noticed this pattern among very neurotypical people in music, is that they can perform and they can create and they can replicate musical excellence in an absolute vacuum of peace, right? Like peace in all its forms, quiet, lack of conflict in their personal lives. Like some people need absolute peace to create, some people really, really need just peace and a formula. And I'm not saying that no good music comes out of that. I'm quite the opposite. I think a lot of standards, a lot of like really interesting, kind of brain bending things can come from that place, right? Because at the end of the day, no form of music is a monolith and people create from different sources all the time, sources in every sense. But I do think that it's worth recognizing that beautiful music comes from extremely neurotypical people with very kind of like 9-to-5 lives that just, you know what I'm saying? Like a lot of commercials are composed by people that have music as a job and they just have to perform in a concentrated place with absolutely no source outside of making money, and having a formula that works for them, and that's not meaningful music. It's just that it reaches who it's going to reach. It serves the purpose that it's going to serve. It serves the purpose that it's going to serve. But you see how that goes back around to that theory of 3 principal forms of making music or reasons, or, and that fits into the serving a purpose category. You know what I'm saying? And so as sentient creators, as creators that need to feel something in order to create, whether that's love, whether that's partnership, whether that's affirmation and identity, which has also become another source for me, which is just being rooted in my Blackness and rooted in our cultural heritage, even the parts that I don't know by name because I'm a descendant of stolen Africans, is that even the notion of belonging to something bigger than what I've experienced in this lifetime, that is a source for me. And so learn this identity and belonging journey for me has brought me to multiple sources that are not just awards in classical music settings and contexts, not just proving my proficiency by placing higher than other people, which is one music that has its own criteria, and that was one source. But once that source disappeared, I couldn't operate in that world anymore. And so that journey, the new source was a love for my culture. Then later that source was different types of personal relationships. And now, again, 13, 14, 15 years later after this breakdown started to happen, it was then coming into, wow, this is incredible. I totally feel the multiplicity of these sources, and I can tap into any of them at will, rather than praying for one of them to grace me, to visit me, so that I can create something
to come.
Yeah, where I'm at now, and that's. I hope that answered your question. You're not questioning
the question I didn't ask.
Yeah, it's yeah.
Always, we're gonna go, because otherwise we'll be here all day, and we both have things to roll on and do.
Right, and we would be too. Oh my goodness,
and we would. So I really appreciate you joining me. As I told you at the beginning, before we hit record, this conversation just goes where it goes. So thank you for going there with me. And I look forward to a part 2. We'll have to do a part 2.
Yeah, let's just get off the pod and set that date.
Stay tuned. There will be a part 2 with Erin of Ola Magnolia, and we will We will be talking about all the things that I said right at the top of this episode that we haven't got to. We'll get to those things next time. So
amazing.
Erin, and listeners, I'll see you soon.
Thank you for joining us today. You can find out more about our guests in the show notes below. And don't forget to hit subscribe and share this episode with a friend. Until next time, I send you big love.